Two young boys brutally murdered. If you didn't do it, then who did? You psychopath. A mother searches for the truth while on death row.
It's all circumstantial. You don't even have a motive.
But can a new investigation
You're sitting there and you're lying to us.
uncover the truth?
Somebody came into my home and murdered my children.
June 6, 1996, 2:30 a.m., Rowlett, Texas, an upscale neighborhood outside of Dallas. 911 operators receive a disturbing call. Police find 6-year-old Devin Routier and his 5-year-old brother Damon stabbed to death on the living room floor. Their 26-year-old mother, Dolly Routier, is alive but bleeding profusely from multiple stab wounds and a gash across her throat. Her husband, Darren, is unharmed but in severe shock. The couple's third child, Drake, only 7 months old, is found safe upstairs in his crib. Dolly is rushed to the hospital. Despite massive bleeding, doctors are able to save her life. With a grisly double murder on their hands and the community in panic, detectives frantically search for the killer. 11 days later, the police announced that Dolly Routier has been arrested for the ruthless, cold-blooded killing of her own 2 children. After only a single day of deliberations, she's found guilty and sentenced to death by lethal injection. For over 10 years, Routier has maintained her innocence, claiming that she and her children had been attacked during a botched robbery, and that the real killer is still out there. My name is Jerry Palace. I'm a private investigator and former detective with the New York City Police Department.
This is the transcript, the part that they blacked out.
Court TV has asked me and my partner, former NYPD homicide detective Reggie Britt, to investigate.
This is really one way, this testimony.
The case became big news and erupted into a media circus. The question on everyone's mind, could a mother really have done something like this to her own children?
Established the time of death 1:30 and 2 a.m. You got to look at what did he base the time of death on. He testified at the trial?
Before heading down to Dallas, we read through the transcripts, police records, and other court documents in our New York City office. But successful investigations aren't about documents and records. The truth isn't in the folders. It's in the eyes of the people who know what really happened.
Take their death row down here very seriously in Texas, boy. This is not the place to commit a murder, because you're going to go meet your maker for sure.
At the time of the murders, Darley's husband, Darren, was upstairs asleep, their third son in the nearby crib. Darren told investigators that when he heard his wife scream, he jumped out of bed and ran downstairs, assuming that an attacker was in the house. He's been a controversial figure ever since. Some say he was involved in the crime.
Can you take us back to that night, June 6th, 1996?
And we were all watching TV downstairs, and Darley had popped some popcorn and everything, and the boys went upstairs and got their blankets and their pillows, and it all laid down on the floor. And me and Darley talked, about different things. So I went back upstairs, and it was probably, 11 o'clock or so, after the news probably, and climbed into bed and went to sleep. And the next thing I hear was this glass break, like, but far away. And then I hear Darley just screaming, Darren. I mean, just freaking out. I mean, it jarred me, and, I jumped up. I run down the stairs as fast as I can. I looked up, I'm yelling at her, what the hell happened? You know, she grabs the phone, she's running back and forth. I'm trying to give Devin CPR, and as soon as I blow into his mouth, I mean, air just comes out of his chest. I didn't know what to do. You just freaking. I mean, just trying to do everything that you can, trying to logically think
about what just happened, and then and all you can do is just sit there on the curb and watch your whole life just be gone.
Rowlett is this little town, right? Small little town.
Yeah.
Nothing like this ever happened.
The stranger came in at my house
Stranger came in.
and killed my kids, took my kids, and almost took my wife. And if Darlie had died, I'd be on death row.
You would be.
With this police department, that's exactly true. Because the truth has nothing to do with it. Somebody had to be responsible for it.
Did the police question you as a suspect? Did you think that they thought you were a suspect?
I think I was so stupid I didn't even think that they thought that was a possibility.
Well, how did you feel when they arrested your wife?
Devastated. And in shock. And wanting to prove that they were wrong.
You said you didn't realize she was hurt until you came back in the house?
Right.
Is that true?
Yeah.
What did you say to her then? You
I made her a
remember?
promise. When I helped her get on the gurney.
And looking into his eyes, realizing just how much he's still in love with his wife. And when he talked about the
DNA found? Yeah. They did elimination and some unknown male, and they haven't been able to put a name to that.
Now, Darlie's lawyers claim that the cops missed critical forensic evidence, including a bloody fingerprint that contained unknown male DNA. Steve Cooper heads up Darlie's new defense team.
The state's theory was that Darlie Lynn murdered her sons, then staged the crime scene, and then inflicted wounds on herself. But we have a couple of things that match to an intruder that only, for instance, this bloody fingerprint. Then we can paint a picture that would demonstrate that, in fact, there was a non-family member in the house that night, and an adult and two children on the living room floor at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Large-breasted, blonde-haired, floozy in a Dallas suburb who was, trying to get rid of these bothersome kids.
How confident do you feel that the courts may give you this?
I mean, we're in the state of Texas where we like to kill people, and our courts uphold the vast majority of death sentences.
looking at the evidence, there's some fingerprint evidence there that doesn't match anybody.
Right, and supposedly the intruders could have been a setup for a burglary or something like that. The burglary that went real bad.
It's all circumstantial. She really didn't have a motive. What's the motive?
It's the possibility that she might be the wrong person. So far, the picture being painted for us wasn't pretty. No motive, outdated DNA testing, and new evidence that, if true, pointed to an unknown male intruder. But 3 weeks into our investigation, we'd already spent more time looking into this case than the original detectives had. And at this point, we had serious doubts if Darlie Routier was the right person.
Yes. I'm recording a video.
Hi, this is Jerry Palace from Quest TV. If you could please give me a call.
We were trying to get in touch with the detectives who had been involved with the case. We wanted to know what they had to say about the new DNA evidence that pointed to a male perpetrator.
Neighbors is a direct line for him.
But so far, we weren't having much luck finding them.
They must be small department.
When investigators first arrived on the scene, they found Darlie bleeding from wounds to her arms and neck, screaming hysterically that someone had broken into her home and killed her 2 sons. A search of the residence found nothing missing, but the police did find a murder weapon, a knife from Routier's own kitchen. Then something puzzling. In an alley, almost a football field's distance from the house, lay one of her husband's socks, splattered with spots of blood, later identified as belonging to their 2 murdered sons. From all our years on the force, Reggie and I had come across some strange pieces of evidence, but this one stumped us. It just didn't make any sense.
Could there have been an intruder?
Man, it could have been an intruder. The only thing I don't like about it, as far as the intruder theory goes, is the fact that somebody broke in, goes in there, commits some sort of burglary, kills 2 kids, nearly kills the mother, and leaves. And 75 yards away, down an alley,
Is a sock.
is a sock belonging to the husband that has some blood on it.
At trial, the prosecution set out to prove that Darlie had murdered her 2 boys, ransacked the living room so it would look like a break-in, doused one of her husband's socks in blood from both of her dead sons, ran down an alley to plant the sock, then came back, stabbed her arm with a knife, used the same knife to slash her own throat, then called 911.
This is where the sock was found. This is an overhead view of the house. You can see it. Here's the house.
3, 4 houses down
Right,
the
yeah, about
alleyway.
4 houses down. Here's where the sock is found. It's got Devin and Damon's blood on it. And this is Darren's sock. Beautiful homes, man.
Oh,
Look at that.
This has got to be it on your side right here.
Yeah, there it is, right on. It's all lit up.
There's it right there.
The sock was found in this alleyway. This is high-end district here. There's some alarms, lights, motion detectors and things. You know, I think lights will be popping on and off here. You know, Reggie, this is the thing that gets me. Is why does a sock get attached to this murderer and dropped here in this alley?
And where do you go from here if you're not from this neighborhood? This house, where it's at, the way it's secluded, it don't fit the other side of, they ran through the back, out of the alleyway, the sock, it just doesn't fit.
Any bad guy will tell you, they're always looking for a way out, you know? They don't want to be cornered. And you back here, you will get cornered.
Right near the carotid artery.
Darlie Routier had no criminal record. In fact, up to this point, she never had much involvement with the police, aside from watching Law and Order. Could she really be the kind of person who would kill her own children and then slash her own throat? The 911 call seemed like it should have been a critical part of Darlie's defense.
When you listen to the call, it sounds like a legit call. I mean, you could hear a real frantic woman. Her emotions are really running hot.
Toby Shook, who prosecuted Darlie, never bought into the 911 call. To him, it was all an act, a desperate woman who resorted to desperate measures to get what she wanted.
I think what got the investigators' attention first, a very low crime neighborhood, no violent crimes occurs in the neighborhood, and it's obvious in this crime that the object of the attack were the boys. These were devastating wounds, penetrating knife wounds that went through their entire bodies. Darlie Routier had a superficial wound to her neck and one to her arm. 2 days after she was released from the hospital, she came to the police station. This would be about 4 or 5 days after the murder, and showed up with these massive bruises on the inside of her arms.
How many days later?
She showed up 2 days after being released from the hospital. I believe she realized the police weren't believing her story. We showed all those bruises to the nurses who attended her and the physicians that attended her. They said that these bruises weren't there. My argument, and maintained also, is that if it's supposed to be some guy who's in there who wants to kill Darlie Routier, and he's hitting her so hard that he's calling these massive bruises on the inside of her arms, how come he didn't smash her in the face? You know, how come he didn't bust her in the nose, in the mouth? She can identify him. Why do you leave her alive so she can identify him? But of course, Darlie got amnesia. He's the luckiest killer in the world. The witness who can put you on death row, she gets amnesia and can't remember anything about you.
I agree with you. I mean, there's somebody breaking and killing 2 kids and she's left with a cut. Why isn't she finished off?
Right. Just didn't make sense. And her story just wasn't adding up. No stranger would come in the house that way. It's very illogical. He said, first of all, we look at, it's a very low crime area. These kinds of killings don't happen. Secondly, this neighborhood is hard to get in and get out of. If you're going to commit a crime like this especially, or even a burglary, you want some easy access. You have to kind of wander around through the neighborhood.
You had the Andrea Yates, so that was in Texas, correct?
Yeah.
Where she drowned her children. And they attribute that something to postpartum depression. Did you ever think of that in these terms at all?
No psychotic. There was no evidence she was suffering from anything. Andrea Yates had a long psychological history and was hearing voices. This is a killing that you have, and then you want to cover the crime up.
I know you're not a doctor, but how would you sum up her behavior? And describing her, how would you describe her as a person?
She's a psychopath.
I got to tell you, this is some hell of a bruise, isn't it? How did you hold somebody down?
I don't know.
And create a bruise like that?
That looked like a truck ran over her.
This guy was holding her down. She had to be struggling to create bruises like this because they run from here down to the wrist.
We only got circumstantial evidence. You got no witness statements. But his circumstantial evidence and the way he explained it makes it look very bad for Darlie.
A close friend of Darlie's testified that she had become depressed after the birth of her 3rd son and had even threatened to commit suicide. And several other people told us that Darlie and Darren had been having problems, including arguments about money. Keeping up with the Joneses was tearing them apart.
There's a lot of evidence here. I mean, I just don't buy the bloody sock 75 yards away found in the alley. I don't buy the intruder, guys come in, what do they do? Well, 1 or 2, whoever it was comes in and kills 2 kids like that, and she gets slashed. How come they don't kill her?
5 weeks into our investigation, Reggie and I had completely changed our opinion of Darlie. We began thinking more and more that she was where she belonged, behind bars. But we'd soon come across evidence that would take everything we'd learned about this case so far and turn it on its head.
Somebody came into my home and murdered my children and me. Dad, somebody
left
has
your
gone.
children for dead.
No.
Look at that blanks there, man.
At this point in our investigation, we had learned a lot about Darlie Routier. We knew that at the time of the murder, she and her husband Darren had been fighting about money.
Was it the mom, Darlie? She sustained some wounds right near the carotid artery. Supposedly missed it by a few millimeters.
A few days after they were murdered, 5-year-old Damon and 6-year-old Devin were laid to rest.
Devin and Damon. Yep. Devin, Damon. Little kids.
Cemetery. What's Taylor Memorial Park? The final resting place of those Small little boys.
Devin and Damon, man. One of the most vicious murders in Texas.
In our town.
In the country. 8 days before his birthday.
Just days after the burials, a local news station broadcast footage of Darlie at the gravesite. The prosecution used the tape as proof that Darlie was a sinister monster out of control and out of touch with reality. But Darlie's mother and sister say the tape was taken completely out of context. We met them at their home in Plano, Texas, 2 towns over from where the murders took place.
The big story about this is the silly string. That was your idea for the silly string?
Yeah.
You're the one that bought that and brought that there? And
You can tell us about it.
It was the most ridiculous thing. You know, Devin was fixing to be 7. We were having a birthday party for him. He was so excited. And then all this happened. You know, his friends had gone out and bought gifts. And then we had to explain to his friends and the neighborhood children that someone had come in and killed them. And, I mean, how do you explain it to little children? You know, little children don't understand the grieving process like adults. They don't understand death and, you know, these horrible things that happen.
So what children there that day, in addition to yourselves?
We had a prayer service
We planned the prayer service, and then we planned to be there at the gravesite that evening so all the kids could come. And since, obviously, we weren't going to have the party, it was just a way for us to all gather and to be together and to feel close and comfort. It wasn't a celebration of their death. Oh, yay, they're dead. Woo-hoo. It was, it's their birthday, you know?
That's the thing that was looked at, examined by so many people. People said it was wrong, it was inappropriate.
And it was so ridiculous. They sat there and they watched that tape over and over and over again.
Who watched it?
The jurors.
The jurors.
They didn't watch anything but the silly string part.
So you blame
I was never allowed to testify. Nobody ever asked me a single question about that.
That's too bad.
So Darlie sits in death row because of silly string and overzealous prosecutors and bad police work.
She was wonderful. She really was, and it's very lonely without her.
She's walking around with a lot of guilt. Do you really feel that she put her sister on death row with that silly string incident?
It meant so much to the jurors that they watched it so many times during the conviction of Darlie. And if it would have been explained the way she did, I think they would have seen it a lot different way.
Later that evening, we met with Tom Hollinshead, a retired DEA agent. Troubled by what took place at Darlie's trial, he spent the past few years taking a look at the case for himself. He agreed that a 20-second tape of a woman shooting silly string was the final blow that convicted Darlie Routier.
When the defense attorney was cross-examining the lead investigator, he got about halfway through, and the judge advised him to take the fifth.
Which investigator was that?
This was Jimmy Patterson, because Patterson had wiretap and the gravesite, looking for a gravesite confession.
The fact that a police officer took the Fifth Amendment, to me, as a jury, that would be the end of their credibility.
I have never, and I've testified, I can't tell you hundreds of homicide trials. I have never took a Fifth Amendment. I said no on the witness.
It's against self-incrimination, and you're the officer, the lead officer in the case. I can't imagine the judge allowing a capital murder case to continue when you can't cross-examine the lead investigator because he took the Fifth Amendment.
That's incredible.
But I'm going to tell you, there's not one piece of direct evidence, not really one piece of credible evidence, why she should spend 10 years on death row or certainly be executed.
You don't do that without a court order. You just can't wiretap somebody, listen to a conversation, let alone the video, the audio. I mean, that's police work 101. You know that stuff.
I think that it should have been thrown out. That whole thing should have been thrown out based on the investigator taking the Fifth Amendment.
If those things are true, I think that's really big. I mean, to me, it sounds like Darlene could be the wrong woman in prison, really. And something like this, we have all the circumstantial evidence. I say, you know what? Go through everything, whatever it is. If there's some DNA evidence, blood, fingerprints, whatever, take it all, do it all, test everything, so that we can at least say, listen, we did everything the defense asked. We checked it all out.
They got the unexplained print, and they believe they have some DNA on the sock.
And I think that's when they're going to exhaust all these things. Because imagine putting somebody, there's no taking it back once you execute it. It's over.
Calling Lieutenant David Davis.
We tried to follow up with the cops.
Hi, this is Jerry Palace from Court TV. If you could please give me a call. Hi, this is Jerry Palace from Court TV. I'm looking for Officer Patterson.
You've reached the Maryland Police Department.
This is Jerry Palace from Court TV. I'd like to leave a message for James Patterson.
Our investigation took on a new sense of urgency. Reggie and I were becoming more and more convinced that an innocent woman might be sitting on death row, and the clock was ticking.
It's about these two kids. They're the real victims of this. Their life was cut so short, so fast. Reggie, what does it mean if Dolly's innocent?
Yeah, the wrong person in jail.
Yeah. And the right person is still out there. That's the real scary part. Man, that a monster like that can be out there. I tell you one thing, I'll be locking my doors.
The next day we had a bombshell dropped on us. A story about Darley's husband, Darren, that came from out of left field. The next day, we met with Skip Hollingsworth, a local journalist who has covered Darley's case from the very beginning.
Very nice.
He claimed to have information about Darley's husband, Darren, that would blow our investigation wide open.
Thanks.
If Darley, the victim, says, my husband Darren had nothing to do with it, and the evidence in the prosecution goes with her, why would they go after Darren?
Why would they go after Darren? Yeah. I got to know this defense attorney that was handling the appeals named Stephen Cooper, and he said to me, Darren's father-in-law, Bob Key, has suddenly remembered Darren coming to him a few weeks before the murder and saying, I am broke. I need to find someone who's going to break into my house, steal all my stuff, my furniture, my jewelry, my valuables, hide it away in a U-Haul. I will claim the insurance, get the insurance money, and I'll be back to even, and then load up my house with the furniture that's been hidden away. And I said, well, is that true? And Cooper says, go ask Darren. So I meet Darren at a restaurant, and I said, did you hire somebody to try to break into your home and burglarize it? And there was this long silence. And he says, are you going to print this? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, I did it. I was asking around. And I said, did you hire anybody? He said, I never hired anybody. But I did let the word out. The story changes everything if true, because it provides a motive. It provides an answer to a question that has haunted everyone. Why would someone break into a nicely lit home in the middle of the night on the cul-de-sac of a pleasant little suburban neighborhood and just walk in and stab two kids to death and cut the throat of their mother and slice her across the arm and then walk out?
Well, did you buy the story? Do you think it was for real? Or did you?
Darren was hardly blameless. There had been evidence that he had tried to get someone to steal his Jaguar and take it to a chop shop when he was going broke in 1996. And there's always been the question of what did Darren do after he discovered that his children had been stabbed to death. And that mystery, which the prosecutors never went into during the trial, because their trial was focused solely on Darley.
What was your next question, Tim?
Are you making up this story to give Darley some wiggle room so when the Court of Appeals hears about this, they might give her a new trial?
And what was his reply?
He said, no. And I said, do you realize that this story, if found to be true, could put you on the spot and right in the hair trigger of the DA. He goes, with a pause, I want to tell you the truth, but I don't want to do anything that might get me arrested and railroaded like Darlie did.
The outside chance that this could be true and maybe he set up his home to be burglarized and the word went out, yeah, this guy's looking to get his house burglarized and one guy, whatever, comes out and does this, you know, and turns bad. He winds up killing 2 kids and trying to kill Darlie, you know.
And it also leads to the other side of the right man, wrong man who committed this homicide.
There is some reasonable doubt about this. Whether Darlie did this herself, whether she was helped by her husband, whether he orchestrated this whole thing with a burglary attempt that went terribly bad and 2 children wound up dead as a result. The bloody sock wasn't the only piece of evidence that potentially linked Darren to the crime. An appeal filed in the wake of Darlie's conviction set out a number of facts that argued in favor of reversing her guilty verdict. First, a hair and a murder weapon matched a known sample of Darren's hair. Second, while Darlie suffered multiple knife wounds during the attack, Darren was totally unharmed. Third, that Darren had a powerful financial motive to kill Darlie. His business was failing and he was deeply in debt, while Darlie's life was insured for $250,000. And we also learned that because Darlie's attorney had represented Darren on another matter, he couldn't argue that Darren might have been involved in the murders.
I don't even know how the judge would allow anything like that. It's quite strange. I don't like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't like that if that was my attorney. Hey, I want you to go after anybody that might be guilty in a case like this. 2 young kids killed? I mean, it's a horrible crime.
How does he get out of that crime scene without leaving a trace of blood? What did he do, get up and fly out of there?
After nearly 6 weeks investigating Darlie Routier's case, we could finally see a light at the end of the tunnel. We just found out that our request to meet with Darlie herself was approved.
Yes, Mama.
Reggie and I were anxious to hear what she had to say. But today was about a local mechanic named Barry Fife, who was rumored to have been solicited by Darren back in the early 90s to take part in an insurance scam. If Barry was involved in this supposedly conspiracy to commit a burglary in a home, get the intruder there, that's a big thing, you know? And Darren just didn't want to get himself involved because he knows if he gets himself involved, he's going to be taking Darlie's spot. Guys like this are always around, somebody who knows him, you know? Yeah. After a little asking around, it was easy enough to find Fife. It seemed everyone either knew him or knew someone who knew him. You Barry Fife? Can we ask you a question? I wanted to talk to you about the Darlie Routier case. Do you remember that? Well, apparently there were allegations made about you and Darren that he wanted to maybe arrange for a burglary of his own house. Do you remember that?
He didn't talk to me about it.
Do you think Darlie is the right person? Do you know anything about Darlie? What kind of person she was?
He did it. I think he did it the whole time.
You think he did it?
I think Darren did it. I just think he snapped.
You think Darren snapped?
Yeah. And when I went over there, the first thing he told me, he said, rough night.
He called it a rough night? That's it?
That's it.
Didn't say anything about the kids or anything? But if
he did it, ran upstairs and acted like he was sleeping or whatever he did, or you know.
Why didn't he kill Darlie?
I think he tried, and she just lived. That's what I think.
He thought that Darren is the one that killed his children and cut his life.
He kind of denied the stolen car thing that Darren ever came to him about his Jaguar. Fife told us that he believed Darren had snapped due to his declining financial situation.
and had killed his 2 young boys in a blind rage.
The other thing we have to find out about Darren is any involvement with Barry Fife, you know? What about that? Is there any truth to that? And if so, what was it? I think at this point he also knows that his name is being dropped around.
Oh, yeah, he knows.
You know, that he could be involved in this somehow.
Information was now pouring in, and we discovered that in 1998, Darren had been given a lie detector test. According to the police, he had failed it.
They made such a big thing about the lie detector test, right? And first it was confrontational, and you know and I know that once you get into a confrontational position with the person that's taking the test, you can't give that your reading.
No, you can't.
According to Darren's account of the lie detector results, he had failed because the police had administered the test improperly. But we sat down and watched the tape for ourselves.
Jerry, as far as I know from my experience of watching polygraphs and being involved in them, this guy did this polygraph perfectly well.
Yep, I agree with you. We were misinformed. We were told it was confrontational. It was confrontational after he failed. After he failed, the guy told him that.
Truth is, you wanted your wife dead. The truth is, you helped arrange for the attempted homicide. The truth is, it was all about money. That's what it's always been all about.
He failed it miserably.
Prior to that, the guy did it 1,000% right as far as I'm concerned.
This guy he mimics me. That's how I would have talked to this
Right.
guy.
So look at this lie detector test. It appears he failed it. And as a result, he knows who the killer is.
What did this all mean? Was Darren responsible for killing his own children? Was he covering up for Darlie? Or was he purely a victim himself, being wrongfully accused?
There's some jungle things here that weren't explored. Right. Supposedly the intruders could have been a setup for a burglary that went real bad because Darren was out there. You know, he had done an insurance scam before, or at least contemplated one. This could have been another one, and just went ugly. It went real ugly, you know. So there's a few things here.
As 2 former NYPD detectives, we had done this sort of thing hundreds of times before. But with this investigation, nothing was what it seemed. Around each corner, instead of answers, we only found more questions. Questions that could only be answered by Darlie herself.
Maybe 70 years of experience. Listen to every kind of crackpot, dirtbag, scumbag in the world, and you sit there and you're telling us that.
After uncovering evidence that Darren may have been involved in the crime, it was time to go face to face with Darlie. Several people who had previously spoken to her warned us that she was a pro at telling her story over and over again. After all, she's been doing it for over 10 years.
They're sure waiting to fry this young lady because it's been since 1996.
Yeah.
It's 10 years already.
She's almost at the end of her appeals at this point. You know, I would think this death sentence is going to be carried out probably the next few years. That's saying a few more years, and that's about it.
The prison had strict rules about interviews. We'd only have 40 minutes and would have to talk to her through bulletproof glass. Darlie knew this was one of her last chances to convince people of her innocence. If her final appeal is denied, she'll likely be executed by lethal injection.
Let me ask you something. Did you ever take a lie detector test? What was the outcome of that?
Inconclusive, I think is the word that they
Inconclusive? You know, your husband Darren took a lie detector test.
Yes.
And he was asked questions
Yes, we heard
about...
that later. Yes.
Actually, we saw the lie detector test. And he failed on a number of questions.
He said that the people that were involved in doing the lie detector test, he just said that they set him up.
Can I ask you one question?
Yes.
Do you still love your husband?
I still have love for my husband.
If you were to leave here today, would you be with your husband?
No, I would not.
Why?
Because I had found out things that I didn't know about back
Like what?
Well, I found out that Darren was talking to somebody about having the house set up for an insurance scam, an insurance kit, whatever it's called.
Verify?
Yes, Verify.
And?
And they had talked about having his car stolen. And Barry took the car. And I was mad.
So if we're to believe that somebody broke in to burglarize your home that night, and I worked on a lot of cases. I was in the police department 20 years. I saw a lot of burglaries. This is a night burglar. It's a cat burglar. They rarely come in looking for weapons. They have their own weapons, and they take care of business. They just come in and they kill two little innocent children, kill them, and almost leave you for dead. We have to believe that.
Right.
If you didn't do it, then who did? You're trying to implicate your husband in this.
Well, I'm not trying to implicate my husband at all. I'm trying to tell the facts. And
No, I hear the facts, but it sounds like you're trying to implicate your husband. Doesn't it sound like that to you?
For answers.
Maybe you had some financial problems. Is that enough to kill someone?
I know I did not kill my children. And if you will talk to other doctors and psychiatrists, people that have been attacked, people that have been in severe trauma.
The evidence points to nobody being in that house but you, Darren, and your children.
Somebody came into my home and murdered my children and me. That is
They
actual
didn't murder
proof.
you, Dolly. They didn't
left
murder you.
me for dead.
No,
Somebody
you left
did
your
not.
children for dead.
No, I did
you
not
left your
murder
children for
my
dead. You're sitting
children.
there and you're lying to us.
No, I'm not.
You're lying to us,
No,
lady.
I'm not.
We're looking at the killer right now.
Dolly Lynn Routier, you haven't shed one tear since we're sitting here.
So that makes me
Not
murder.
one, not a tear. You can well up them eyes, but you can't make a tear come down.
You don't know what I do in the tears I've cried when I am by myself.
Well, if you didn't kill your children, who killed them?
Reggie and I purposely put Dolly through the ringer, and she held up well, but we still weren't sure.
You're lying to us.
Later that evening, we popped in the tape of the interview and watched it to see if there's something we missed.
You know, this scenario is possible. The burglary went real bad.
Look at the emotion she's showing.
I know. Maybe there's some truth to this thing. This thing gets me about death penalty cases. You have to review these things before you put someone to death. You make sure. I mean, the bloody fingerprint that we know about. There's no taking it back. Once you execute her, it's over.
Whether it was Dolly herself, a complete stranger, or if the murders somehow involved Darren, both Reggie and I had a hunch that killing the two young Routier boys wasn't supposed to happen. But it did, and both Darlie and Darren have paid a high price, as a shadow will hang over each of them for the rest of their lives. In the end, despite Darlie's conviction, Reggie and I weren't convinced. She was put away largely on circumstantial evidence, too thin and flimsy to put someone to death. The bloody sock wasn't the only piece of evidence that potentially linked Darren to the crime. An appeal filed in the wake of Darley's conviction set out a number of facts that argued in favor of reversing her guilty verdict. First, a hair in a murder weapon matched a known sample of Darren's hair. Second, while Darley suffered multiple knife wounds during the attack, Darren was totally unharmed. Third, that Darren had a powerful financial motive to kill Darley. His business was failing and he was deeply in debt, while Darley's life was insured for $250,000. And we also learned that because Darley's attorney had represented Darren on another matter, he couldn't argue that Darren might have been involved in the murders.
I don't even know how the judge would allow anything like that. It's quite strange. I don't like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't like that if that was my attorney. Hey, I want you to go after anybody that might be guilty in a case like this. 2 young kids killed? I mean, it's a horrible crime.
How does he get out of that crime scene without leaving a trace of blood? What did he do, get up and fly out of there?
After nearly 6 weeks investigating Darley Routier's case, we could finally see a light at the end of the tunnel. We just found out that our request to meet with Darley herself was approved. Reggie and I were anxious to hear what she had to say. But today was about a local mechanic named Barry Fife, who was rumored to have been solicited by Darren back in the early 90s to take part in an insurance scam.
If Barry was involved in this supposedly conspiracy to commit a burglary in a home, get the intruder there, that's a big thing, you know? And Darren just didn't want to get himself involved because he knows if he gets himself involved, he's going to be taking Darley's spot. Guys like this are always around. Somebody knows him, you know?
Yeah.
After a little asking around, it was easy enough to find Fife. It seemed everyone either knew him or knew someone who knew him.
You Barry Fife? Can we ask you a question? I wanted to talk to you about the Darley Routier case. Do you remember that? Well, apparently there were allegations made about you and Darren that he wanted to maybe arrange for a burglary of his own house. Do you remember that?
He didn't talk to me about it.
Do you think Darley is the right person? Do you know anything about Darley? What kind of person she was?
He did it. I think he did it the whole time.
You think he did it?
I think Darren did it. I just think he snapped.
You think Darren snapped?
Yeah. And when I went over there, the first thing he told me, he said, rough night.
He called it a rough night? That's it?
That's it.
Didn't say anything about the kids or anything? But if he
did it, ran upstairs and acted like he was sleeping or whatever he did, or you know.
Why didn't he kill Darley?
I think he tried, and she just lived. That's what I think.
He thought that Darren is the one that killed his children and cut his life.
He kind of denied the stolen car thing that Darren ever came to him about his Jaguar.
Fife told us that he believed Darren had snapped due to his declining financial situation and had killed his 2 young boys in a blind rage.
The other thing we have to find out about Darren is any involvement with Barry Fife, you know? What about that? Is there any truth to that? And if so, what was it? I think at this point he also knows that his name is being dropped around.
Oh, yeah, he knows.
You know, that he could be involved in this somehow.
Information was now pouring in, and we discovered that in 1998, Darren had been given a lie detector test. According to the police, he had failed it.
They made such a big thing about the lie detector test, right? And we've heard that it was confrontational, and you know and I know that once you get into a confrontational position with the person that's taking the test, you can't get an accurate reading.
No, you can't.
According to Darren's account of the lie detector results, he had failed because the police had administered the test improperly. But we sat down and watched the tape for ourselves.
Jerry, as far as I know from my experience in watching polygraphs and being involved in them, this guy did this polygraph perfectly well.
Yep, I agree with you. We were misinformed. We were told it was confrontational. It was confrontational after he failed. After he failed, the guy told him that.
Truth is, you wanted your wife dead. The truth is, you helped arrange for the attempted homicide. The truth is, it was all about money. That's what it's always been all about.
He failed it miserably.
Prior to that, the guy did it 1,000% right as far as I'm concerned.
That's how he mimics me. That's how I would have talked to this guy.
If you look at this lie detector test, it appears he failed it. And as a result, he knows who the killer is.
What did this all mean? Was Darren responsible for killing his own children? Was he covering up for Darlie? Or was he purely a victim himself, being wrongfully accused?
There's some jungle things there that weren't explored.
Right, supposedly the intruders could have been a setup for a burglary that went real bad because Darren was out there, he had done an insurance scam before, or at least contemplated one. This could have been another one, and just went ugly. It went real ugly, So there's a few things here.
As two former NYPD detectives, we had done this sort of thing hundreds of times before. But with this investigation, nothing was what it seemed. Around each corner, instead of answers, we only found more questions. Questions that could only be answered by Darlie herself.
Maybe 70 years of experience. Listen to every kind of crackpot, dirtbag, scumbag in the world, and you sit there and you're telling us that.
After uncovering evidence that Darren may have been involved in the crime, it was time to go face to face with Darlie. Several people who had previously spoken to her warned us that she was a pro at telling her story over and over again. After all, she's been doing it for over 10 years.
They're sure waiting to try this young lady because it's been since 1996.
Yeah.
It's 10 years already.
She's almost at the end of her appeals at this point. I would think this death sentence is going to be carried out probably the next few years. That's saying a few more years, and that's about it.
The prison had strict rules about interviews. We'd only have 40 minutes and would have to talk to her through bulletproof glass. Darlie knew this was one of her last chances to convince people of her innocence. If her final appeal is denied, she'll likely be executed by lethal injection.
Let me ask you something. Did you ever take a lie detector test?
I did.
What was the outcome of that?
Inconclusive.
Summer 1996. The peaceful community of Rowlett, near Dallas, Texas, is shattered by an unimaginable crime.
There was a lot of human carnage, lots of blood.
Two young brothers are viciously stabbed in the sanctuary of their own home.
I've dealt with some of the worst of the worst, and it's still hard for me to comprehend the mind that would lead to this kind of horrific crime.
It is a shocking home invasion that stuns Rowlett. The victims are a young, successful, law-abiding family. No one can fathom what the motive could be. By their mid-20s, teenage sweethearts Darren and Darlie Routier are leading enviable lives.
We're to Cancun this weekend. We are going to Cancun. It's going to be fantastic.
To the world, she looks like she has everything. She has all the trappings of wealth. She appears to be happy.
Oh, he's so gorgeous. So it's not like a resort in Scottsdale.
Thanks to their profitable computer company, they are rich and enjoy flaunting it.
Oh, yeah. Should I forget the
Darren is in awe of his wife and of her expensive, man-made enhancements.
She was quite buxom, and Darren just loved that about her. He would say, "Isn't Darlie beautiful?" And he would even mention her breasts to them.
It smacks of me, look at me. It was overdone. And yet for her, it seemed okay.
But when the children come along, Darlie can no longer hog the limelight.
Damon was 5, Devin was 7. They loved to play, they had friends, they loved going outside. Great kids.
I'm busy.
The birth of their third son, Drake, makes Darlie a full-time, stay-at-home mom.
I don't really care what you've done.
And she resents it.
I'm busy. Getting this plan wrong.
Darren is the caring parent.
Darren was, I think, a very involved father. He really truly loved those 2 boys.
Hello, my little Mr. Spider-Bite. How you doing?
The more attention Darren gives the boys, the more resentful Darlie becomes.
I think Darlie had a certain amount of jealousy, but Darren paid more attention to the boys than he did to her.
I've been stuck here in this house all day with these boys screaming and whining at me. Where's your baby? They're just playing. I'm going to get some space. I was working today. What do you want me to do?
She always was trying to portray this happy face. I love being a mother. We have the perfect life. When just the opposite was true. There were a lot of problems behind the scenes with them.
And then her life gets worse.
Darling, honey, what's this? I don't know. It's something you bought, something we can't afford.
The Routiers' business is no longer booming.
You spend money like it's water. Well, you know I need our things.
Their lavish lifestyle is slipping away.
There was just a lot of strain. The Jaguar was broken. He was having to take her car. She was left alone with the children at home. There was a lot of stress at that time. Just long for the day when I had no obligations.
When Darlie looks for someone to blame for her predicament, she doesn't look far.
She had some postpartum depression after Drake, the youngest, was born.
Postpartum depression is a very, very real thing. And in her mind, which isn't right, the depression is being caused by the babies.
Darlie is trying to find a way out. She's trying to find her freedom. How can she achieve that?
In her mind, there is only one way. Darlie Routier's picture-perfect life is falling apart.
Get us out of debt, and then I'll be fine.
She and Darren are spending every dime that they're making out there. They're living, as they say, they're living large.
The glamorous mother of 3 is depressed, in debt,
I'm just gonna stay out here with the boys, okay?
and constantly arguing with her husband, Darren.
Her life was falling apart. And these stressors all came into play until they finally just exploded that evening.
Two a.m., June 6th, 1996. Darlie is sleeping in the family room with her 2 eldest sons.
The 2 boys are laying on the carpet near her. They're probably fallen asleep at this point. It's late at night.
Darren is upstairs with baby Drake.
She actually gets a knife out of the kitchen. She approaches the boys. I believe that she killed Devin first.
She struck with such a severe force with a knife that the blade went through his body, through the carpet, the pad, and hit the concrete below.
Darlie then turns on 5-year-old Damon.
Damon was stabbed near Devin, but he then got up, struggled, and was moving toward, I believe, the staircase.
He crawled 15 feet towards the front door, where they believe that he was struck again.
This child would not have lost consciousness immediately and would not have died immediately. He would have seen the person who was stabbing him and, in all likelihood, would have been frightened out of his mind.
Darlie now tries to protect herself from suspicion.
Darlie went into the kitchen. She took that knife and she slit her own throat.
Dolly was trying to create everybody's biggest fear. The big, bad boogeyman who comes and kills your children, or you, or both.
Darren! Darren!
That was one of the strangest 911 calls I've ever heard. One of her children, Damon, is still breathing. He is still struggling for his life. And yet in that call, she makes no mention of him, but she starts to talk about possible forensic evidence, fingerprint evidence that may be found out there.
When people are calling information into the police, they tend to not reveal anything more on the phone than get over here as quickly as you can. Darlie talked too much.
The brutal and senseless murders shock the Rowlett community. So too does the bizarre performance Darlie stages for the media just 1 week after the murders.
One of the boys would have turned 7 the following week, and so she decided to have a birthday party at the cemetery where the boys were buried.
How could a mother, a week after the murders themselves, how could she be out there smiling, laughing, and shooting silly string?
She was dressed inappropriately, and yet, for her, that was okay. It makes it kind of easy to understand, perhaps, why she killed her children.
Investigating police officers are also having doubts about Darlie. David Neighbors is the commander of the crime scene unit.
Things just didn't add up. We were there for 13 days, and as we collected evidence, it wasn't matching her story.
Investigators soon conclude the home invasion is a staged event.
In all of my career as a prosecutor, I had never seen a burglar take the time to make a perfect T-cut in a screen such as this one.
Darlie claims she chased the intruder.
I'm told that Darlie has run through the kitchen barefoot. There's broken glass on the floor of that kitchen, and yet she has no cuts to the bottom of her feet.
The murder weapon is one of Routier's own knives.
The intruder supposedly left the knife behind, disarmed himself while he was being chased by one of his victims. I've never seen it done. I've never heard of that being done again.
Just as suspicious as the crime scene are Darlie's wounds.
She had what I would call superficial wounds compared to the other two victims because they had deep penetrating stab wounds to the chest, meant to kill.
Darlie Routier is arrested and charged with the murder of her 2 children. Darren refuses to believe she did it.
Her husband was there for her. He testified at trial, and he continued to support her throughout this.
Darlie is found guilty of 2 counts of capital murder. The jury sends her one last message when they hand down their verdict.
The jury had placed the pictures of those 2 boys in such a position that Darlie Routier had to sit there and look at the 2 boys' pictures as that verdict was announced.
Darlie lives on death row, awaiting her execution.
How can you wake up one day and kill both your kids? I don't know how you can do that. But some way she reasoned that she could.
Our society tends to think having children and raising children is it. But it isn't for everybody. And it wasn't for Darlie.